Standing in the courthouse steps at 19 years old, I held the deed to 800 acres in my trembling hands while my cousin Jeffrey Garcia screamed threats behind me. The judge had just ruled in my favor, but Jeffrey's words cut deeper than any legal victory could heal. Wutahad. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 3 years fighting for land I'd never seen, left to me by a grandmother I'd never met, while living in a system that taught me not to expect anything from family. But let me take you back to where this all started, because the real story isn't about winning a court case. It's about discovering that sometimes the family you never knew you had can still save you, even from beyond the grave. I was 17 when the letter arrived at Riverside Group Home, forwarded through 3 different foster placements and 2 social workers who'd moved on to other jobs. The envelope was thick cream paper, the kind that felt expensive between your fingers, addressed to Brian Gonzalez in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside, a law firm's letterhead announced that my grandmother, Dorothy Rodriguez, had passed away 6 months earlier and left me her ranch in Cedar Valley, Texas. I read that letter 17 times that first night, sitting on my narrow bed while my roommate Christopher Sanders snored in the bunk above me. Dorothy Rodriguez. The name meant nothing to me, but according to the lawyer's carefully worded explanation, she was my father's mother. My father, who'd been a mystery my entire life. My mother had died when I was 4, and I'd been in the system ever since, bouncing between homes like a pinball nobody wanted to catch. The letter explained that Dorothy had been searching for me for years, working with private investigators and social services, but the system's bureaucracy had kept us apart. She'd found me just 3 months before her death, too late for a reunion, but not too late to leave me everything she owned. 800 acres of working ranch land, a farmhouse, outbuildings, and according to the attached property assessment, enough value to change my life forever. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I called the law firm the next morning using the group home's phone while Mrs. Patterson, our house manager, listened from the kitchen doorway. The lawyer, Robert Richardson, had a voice like warm honey and patience I wasn't used to from adults. He explained that there were complications. My cousin Jeffrey, Dorothy's other grandchild, had been living on the property and managing it for the past 5 years. He'd been expecting to inherit everything and wasn't taking the news well. Your grandmother was very specific in her will, Robert told me. She wanted you to have the ranch, but she also left instructions that if you chose to claim it, you'd need to prove you could handle the responsibility. Jeffrey is contesting the will, claiming your grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it. The legal battle would take time, maybe years. I was aging out of the system in 8 months, with nowhere to go and no resources except whatever part-time jobs I could find. But something about that letter, about wishes, knowing I had family who'd been looking for me, gave me a purpose I'd never felt before. I spent those 8 months preparing. I researched ranching, studied agricultural practices online at the library, and saved every penny from my job at the local grocery store. Mrs. Patterson helped me apply for community college courses in agricultural science, and I threw myself into learning everything I could about cattle, land management, and farm equipment. If I was going to fight for this inheritance, I wanted to be worthy of it. The day I aged out of Riverside Group Home, Robert Richardson picked me up in his dusty pickup truck. The 5-hour drive to Cedar Valley gave us time to talk about the case. Jeffrey had been living on the ranch since he was 24, after a series of failed jobs and what Robert diplomatically called personal troubles. Dorothy had taken him in, hoping family responsibility would straighten him out. She loved that boy, Robert said, his eyes on the highway stretching ahead of us. But she also saw what he was becoming: the drinking, the gambling, the way he treated the land and the animals. Your grandmother was a practical woman, Brian. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in accountability. As we drove deeper into Texas Hill Country, the landscape changed from suburban sprawl to rolling pastures dotted with oak trees. My heart hammered against my ribs as we turned onto a gravel road marked with a weathered sign, Rodriguez Ranch, established 1952. This was it. This was the place my grandmother had wanted me to have, the home I'd never known existed. The farmhouse sat on a small rise, a white 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and green shutters. It looked like something from a movie about the perfect American family. The kind of place I dreamed about during those long nights in group homes and foster care. Outbuildings scattered around the property spoke of decades of hard work. A red barn that had seen better days, equipment sheds, and what looked like a workshop. But the first person I met wasn't welcoming. Jeffrey Garcia stood on the porch like he owned it, which I supposed he thought he did. He was 31, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes that held no warmth when they looked at me. His greeting was a sneer and a question that cut right to the bone. Quote, 6. The next few hours were tense as Robert explained the legal situation. I had the right to inspect the property and begin the process of taking possession. But Jeffrey wasn't going anywhere without a fight. He'd hired his own lawyer and was prepared to drag this through court for as long as it took. Meanwhile, I needed somewhere to stay, and the nearest town was 20 miles away. That's when I met Jacqueline Harris, Dorothy's neighbor and closest friend. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. She'd driven over when she saw Robert's truck, curious about the grandson Dorothy had talked about for months before her death. Quote 7, Jacqueline told me, her voice gentle but firm. Quote, Jacqueline offered me a place to stay in her guest room while the legal battle played out, and I accepted gratefully. That first night in Cedar Valley, I lay awake listening to sounds I'd never heard before. Cattle lowing in distant pastures, the whisper of wind through oak trees, the profound silence of a place far from city lights. It should have been peaceful, but my mind raced with doubts. What did I know about ranching? What if Jeffrey was right and I was just some orphan kid with no business claiming this inheritance? What if my grandmother had made a mistake, choosing me over someone who'd actually been there for her final years? The legal proceedings began in earnest the following week. Jeffrey's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Gregory Walker, painted me as an opportunistic stranger trying to steal from the family member who'd actually cared for Dorothy in her final years. He questioned my character, my ability to manage such a large property, and my motives for suddenly appearing to claim an inheritance from a woman I'd never met. Robert countered with Dorothy's own words, recorded in letters she'd written but never sent, found in her desk after her death. In those letters, she'd poured out her heart about searching for me, about her regrets over the family fractures that had kept us apart, and about her hopes for what I might become with the right opportunity. Quote 9, she'd written in one letter dated just 2 months before her death. But I know him. I've seen his school records, talked to his social workers, watched him from afar as much as the system would allow. He's got the Rodriguez determination and the kind of character that comes from surviving hardship. Jeffrey has had every advantage and squandered them all. Brian has had nothing and made something of himself anyway. Reading those words in court, surrounded by strangers arguing over my future, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Unconditional love from family. My grandmother had chosen me not despite my background, but because of it. She'd seen strength where I'd only seen abandonment. But Jeffrey wasn't giving up easily. He'd been managing the ranch for 5 years, and he knew every acre, every piece of equipment, every challenge the property faced. During depositions, he made it clear that he considered the ranch his by right of presence and effort, regardless of what any will might say. He testified. His words stung because they contained a grain of truth. I had no practical experience with ranching, no history with the land, no relationship with the community. But I had something Jeffrey didn't understand, the desperate hunger of someone who'd never had a real home and was willing to do whatever it took to earn one. While the legal battle dragged on, I spent every day learning. Jacqueline introduced me to other ranchers in the area, and I volunteered to work for anyone who'd teach me. I learned to read weather patterns, to recognize signs of illness in cattle, to operate equipment that seemed impossibly complex at first. My hands, soft from years of indoor work, grew calloused and strong. The community's reaction to me was mixed. Some saw me as Dorothy's rightful heir, a young man deserving of a chance. Others viewed me with suspicion, wondering what I really wanted and whether I'd stick around when the work got hard. But slowly, through consistent effort and genuine respect for what I was learning, I began to earn acceptance. Catherine Williams, who ran the local feed store, became an unofficial mentor. She'd known Dorothy for 30 years and had watched Jeffrey's gradual decline with disappointment. Quote 13, she told me one afternoon as I loaded feed into Jacqueline's truck. She saw potential where others saw problems. The question is whether you'll prove her right. That question haunted me through the long months of legal proceedings. Every night, I studied agricultural texts and ranch management guides. Every morning, I worked alongside neighbors who were slowly becoming friends. I was building the knowledge and skills I'd need to succeed, but I was also building something more important, a sense of belonging. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. While going through Dorothy's papers more thoroughly, Robert discovered a series of journals she'd kept for the past decade. In them, she documented Jeffrey's behavior in detail, the times he'd sold cattle without permission to pay gambling debts, the equipment he'd damaged through carelessness, the way he'd treated longtime ranch hands with disrespect until they'd quit. But more importantly, the journals revealed Dorothy's growing certainty about her decision to leave the ranch to me. She'd hired private investigators not just to find me, but to learn about my character. She knew about my grades in school despite changing placements, my work ethic at part-time jobs, the way I'd helped younger kids in group homes. She'd been watching from afar, building a picture of who I was becoming. Quote 15 she'd written in one entry. He's learned to work for everything he's gotten to appreciate what others might overlook. Jeffrey has had every advantage and learned to expect more. The ranch needs someone who understands that ownership is about responsibility, not entitlement. When these journals were presented in court, the tone of the proceedings shifted dramatically. Gregory Walker's arguments about Jeffrey's superior claim began to sound hollow when measured against Dorothy's careful documentation of his failures. The judge, a practical woman named Deborah Smith, who'd grown up on a ranch herself, seemed increasingly convinced that Dorothy had made her decision with full knowledge of both grandsons' characters. But the most powerful moment came when Robert called Jacqueline Harris to testify about Dorothy's final months. With tears in her eyes, she described how my grandmother had talked constantly about her plans for when I came home, how she'd researched agricultural programs at nearby colleges, set aside money for my education, even planned which pastures would be best for me to start learning cattle management. Note 17. Jacqueline testified. Ich tinte aus. Jeffrey's reaction to this testimony was explosive. He stood up in court, shouting about fairness and family loyalty, about how he'd sacrificed years of his life for the ranch while I'd been living off taxpayers. His outburst only reinforced the judge's growing impression that Dorothy had made the right choice. The final arguments lasted 2 days. Gregory Walker painted Jeffrey as a devoted grandson who'd been unfairly disinherited in favor of a stranger. Robert countered with evidence of Dorothy's careful consideration, her detailed knowledge of both grandsons, and her clear intention to give the ranch to someone who would preserve her legacy rather than squander it. When Judge Smith announced her decision, the courtroom was packed with neighbors and community members who'd followed the case. She ruled that Dorothy Rodriguez had been of sound mind when she wrote her will, that her decision was based on reasonable considerations of both grandsons' characters, and that the will would stand as written. The ranch was mine. Jeffrey's reaction was immediate and ugly. He accused me of manipulation, of using my sob story as an orphan to steal what rightfully belonged to him. His threats followed me out of the courthouse, but they couldn't touch the profound sense of validation I felt. My grandmother, who I'd never met but who'd known me better than I'd realized, had seen something in me worth fighting for. Taking actual possession of the ranch was both thrilling and terrifying. Jeffrey had 30 days to vacate the property, and he used every one of them to make the transition as difficult as possible. Equipment mysteriously broke down, cattle got loose from pastures with damaged fences, and the farmhouse's plumbing developed problems that seemed suspiciously deliberate. But the community rallied around me in ways I'd never expected. Neighbors who'd been watching the legal battle with interest now stepped forward to help. Christopher Sanders, a local mechanic who'd become a friend during my months of preparation, helped me assess and repair the sabotaged equipment. Kimberly King, who managed the largest ranch in the county, offered to sell me cattle at cost to replace the ones Jeffrey had sold off before leaving. The day Jeffrey finally moved out was tense but anticlimactic. He loaded his possessions into a rental truck while I waited with Robert and the sheriff, ensuring the transition went smoothly. As he prepared to leave, Jeffrey turned to me with a look of pure hatred. "You think you've won something," he said, "but you have no idea what you're getting into. This ranch will chew you up and spit you out. You'll be bankrupt within 2 years, and then you'll understand what you've cost me." His words should have hurt, but instead they strengthened my resolve. I'd been underestimated my entire life, told I'd never amount to anything because of where I came from. Every success I'd achieved had been in spite of people's low expectations, and this would be no different. That first night alone in the farmhouse, I walked through rooms that were finally legally mine. Dorothy's furniture remained, along with family photos that included faces I was slowly learning to identify. There was my father as a young man, looking remarkably like me. There was Dorothy herself at various ages, always with the determined expression that Jacqueline said I'd inherited. In Dorothy's bedroom, I found more letters she'd written but never sent. These were addressed to me directly, full of advice about ranching, about life, about the importance of building something lasting. One passage stood out. "Brian, I know you'll read this someday when you're wondering if you made the right choice coming here. Remember that home isn't just a place you inherit. It's something you build through daily choices to care for the land, the animals, and the community around you. You have the heart for this work. Trust yourself." The learning curve was steep and unforgiving. My first month as a ranch owner was a series of small disasters and hard-won victories. I lost 3 calves to a predator I hadn't properly protected against. I spent 2 days searching for cattle that had wandered through a fence I thought was secure. I discovered that theoretical knowledge about equipment maintenance was very different from the practical reality of keeping aging machinery running. But for every mistake, there was a neighbor willing to teach me better ways. For every setback, there was progress that reminded me why I was fighting so hard to succeed. Most importantly, there was the profound satisfaction of waking up each morning in a place that belonged to me, working land that was mine to care for and improve. Jacqueline remained my closest advisor and surrogate grandmother. She helped me understand Dorothy's systems for managing the ranch, introduced me to suppliers and buyers, and shared stories about my grandmother that helped me feel connected to family history I'd never known existed. Through her, I learned that Dorothy had been a pioneer in sustainable ranching practices, that she'd been respected throughout the region for her knowledge and integrity. 6 months after taking possession of the ranch, I faced my first major crisis. A severe drought hit the region, testing every rancher's resources and skills. Pastures that had been green when I inherited them turned brown and brittle. Water sources that had seemed reliable began to run low. Cattle that had been thriving started showing signs of stress. This was the moment Jeffrey had predicted would break me, and I could feel the community watching to see how I'd handle it. Some ranchers were selling cattle early, taking losses to avoid the cost of feeding animals through a drought. Others were trucking in water and supplemental feed, hoping the weather would break before their resources ran out. I chose a middle path, guided by advice from Catherine Williams and strategies I found in Dorothy's journals. She'd faced droughts before and had developed systems for managing them. I sold some cattle but kept the breeding stock, invested in better water management systems, and worked with neighbors to share resources and knowledge. The physical demands were exhausting. 12-hour days became 14-hour days as I hauled water, moved cattle to better pastures, and maintained equipment under increasingly difficult conditions. My hands, already calloused from months of ranch work, became cracked and raw. My back ached constantly from lifting feed bags and wrestling with stubborn machinery. But something remarkable happened during those difficult months. The community's acceptance of me shifted from cautious tolerance to genuine respect. When I helped Christopher Sanders repair his well pump without being asked, when I shared my water reserves with Kimberly King during a particularly dry spell, when I worked alongside seasoned ranchers without complaint or self-pity, I proved that I belonged here. The drought also revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Years of adapting to new situations in foster care had taught me resilience and resourcefulness. The discipline I developed studying for my GED while working part-time jobs served me well when managing complex ranch operations under stress. Most importantly, the determination that had carried me through legal battles now sustained me through physical and financial challenges. By the time the rains finally came in late fall, I'd not only survived my first major test as a rancher, but had actually improved the property. The water management systems I'd installed would serve the ranch for decades. The relationships I'd built with neighbors had created a support network that would help me through future challenges. The cattle I'd kept were healthier and more valuable than when I'd started. Standing in my pasture after the first good rain in months, watching steam rise from grateful earth and cattle moving eagerly toward fresh grass, I felt something I'd been searching for my entire life. The deep satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, doing work that mattered. That evening, I called Robert Richardson to thank him for his guidance through the legal battle. "You've done something remarkable, Brian," he told me. "Dorothy would be proud of what you've built here. But more than that, you've proven that character matters more than circumstances. You've honored her faith in you." The first-year anniversary of Dorothy's death fell on a crisp October morning. Jacqueline and I drove to the small cemetery where she was buried, carrying flowers from the ranch's garden. Standing beside her grave, I finally spoke directly to the grandmother I'd never met, but who had changed my life completely. I said simply, quote 25. As I settled into my second year as a ranch owner, the rhythm of the work became second nature. I could read weather patterns in the sky, recognize the early signs of illness in cattle, and operate equipment that had once seemed impossibly complex. More importantly, I become part of the community fabric in ways that felt natural and earned. The local agricultural extension office asked me to speak at a conference about young ranchers and sustainable practices. Standing before an audience of experienced farmers and ranchers, I talked about learning to see the land as Dorothy had, not as something to exploit, but as something to steward for future generations. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and several young people approached me afterward, inspired by the idea that ranching could be a path for people from non-traditional backgrounds. That speaking engagement led to other opportunities. I started mentoring teenagers from the foster care system, showing them that agricultural careers were possible even without family connections to farming. I partnered with local schools to offer internships on the ranch, teaching practical skills while helping young people understand where their food comes from. The ranch itself continued to thrive. I'd expanded the sustainable practices Dorothy had started, implementing rotational grazing systems that improve soil health while supporting more cattle per acre. I'd also diversified beyond cattle, adding a small organic vegetable operation that supplied local restaurants and farmers markets. The additional income stream provided financial stability while connecting me more deeply to the broader agricultural community. But success brought its own challenges. As the ranch became more profitable and my reputation grew, I started receiving offers from developers interested in purchasing the land for residential subdivisions. The amounts they offered were staggering, enough to set me up financially for life without the daily demands of ranching. I was tempted, especially during difficult days when equipment broke down or cattle got sick or the weather didn't cooperate. It would be easy to take the money and move on, to use Dorothy's gift as a stepping stone to an easier life rather than a calling to continue her work. The decision crystallized during a conversation with an elderly rancher named Robert Richardson. No relation to my lawyer, but someone who'd known Dorothy for 40 years. He had heard about the development offers and wanted to share his perspective. "Son," he said, sitting on my porch on a warm spring evening, "money's important, but it's not everything. Your grandmother didn't leave you this ranch so you could sell it to the highest bidder. She left it to you because she believed you'd understand what it really represents. A way of life, a connection to the land, a responsibility to future generations." He was right, of course. Selling the ranch would betray everything Dorothy had believed about my character, everything I'd proven to myself and the community over the past 2 years. This wasn't just my inheritance, it was my legacy to preserve and pass on. I turned down the development offers and instead focused on expanding the ranch's educational mission. I worked with the local community college to establish an agricultural internship program, providing hands-on training for students interested in sustainable farming. I opened the ranch for school field trips, teaching children about where their food comes from and why protecting agricultural land matters. These activities didn't generate immediate income, but they created something more valuable, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal success. I was becoming the kind of person Dorothy had hoped I'd become, someone who understood that ownership meant responsibility not just to yourself, but to your community and future generations. 3 years after inheriting the ranch, I received an unexpected visitor. Jeffrey Garcia stood on my porch on a hot summer morning, looking older and more weathered than I remembered. The anger that had defined our previous interactions was gone, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion. He said simply, "We sat on the porch where Dorothy used to sit every evening, looking out over pastures that were greener and more productive than they'd been when I inherited them." Jeffrey was quiet for a long time, and I waited, curious about what had brought him back. "I've been watching what you've done here," he finally said, "following the ranch's progress, hearing about your success. I came to hate you for taking what I thought was mine, but I can see now that Grandma made the right choice." He told me about the past 3 years of his life: failed business ventures, continued struggles with gambling and drinking, relationships destroyed by his bitterness over losing the inheritance. He'd blamed me for his problems, but gradually he'd come to understand that his issues ran deeper than losing the ranch. "I never appreciated what I had when I was here," he admitted. "I saw the ranch as something I was entitled to, not something I needed to earn. You've turned it into something she always wanted it to be, something I never could have created." His apology was halting and imperfect, but it was genuine. More importantly, it represented a kind of healing I hadn't realized I needed. The anger and resentment I'd carried about his attempts to take the ranch began to dissolve, replaced by something approaching understanding. "She loved you too," I told him. "Dorothy's journals made that clear. She was disappointed in your choices, but she never stopped hoping you'd find your way." We talked for hours that day, sharing memories of Dorothy from our different perspectives, beginning to understand each other as people rather than adversaries. Jeffrey asked about the ranch operations, genuinely interested in the improvements I'd made. I found myself offering advice about agricultural careers, suggesting programs that might help him rebuild his life. When he left that evening, we shook hands like family members who'd found their way back to each other. I knew we'd never be close, but the bitter conflict that had defined our relationship was finally over. Dorothy would have been pleased to see us making peace on the porch where she dreamed of bringing her family together. That conversation with Jeffrey marked another turning point in my relationship with the ranch and the community. I'd proven myself as a rancher and a neighbor, but now I was becoming something more: a bridge between different worlds and different generations, someone who could help others find their own paths to belonging. I started working with social services to provide agricultural internships specifically for young people aging out of foster care. These weren't charity positions, but real jobs with real responsibilities, offering the same kind of opportunity Dorothy had given me. Some of the young people thrived, discovering talents and interests they'd never known they possessed. Others struggled with the demands of ranch life, but even they gained valuable experience and confidence. One of these interns, an 18-year-old named Christopher Sanders, reminded me of myself at that age. Intelligent, determined, but wounded by years in the system. He threw himself into ranch work with the same desperate hunger I'd felt, as if proving himself through physical labor could heal old emotional wounds. "Why are you doing this?" he asked me one evening as we finished repairing fence line. "Giving kids like us a chance when you could just hire experienced help?" I thought about his question as we loaded tools into the truck, remembering my own confusion when Dorothy's lawyer first explained my inheritance. I finally answered. Christopher nodded, understanding immediately. Over the following months, I watched him transform from a defensive, angry young man into someone confident in his abilities and secure in his place on the ranch. He had a natural gift with cattle and a mechanical aptitude that made him invaluable when equipment needed repair. By the end of his first year, Christopher had become more than an intern. He was family. When he aged out of the system, I offered him a permanent position as ranch foreman, with housing in the renovated apartment above the barn. His acceptance felt like continuing Dorothy's legacy in the most meaningful way possible. The ranch was now supporting not just me, but Christopher and 2 other full-time employees, plus seasonal workers during busy periods. We'd expanded the cattle operation, added sheep for wool production, and developed the organic vegetable business into a significant revenue source. More importantly, we created a workplace culture based on mutual respect and shared responsibility, the kind of environment where people could grow and thrive. Community recognition of our success came in various forms. The state agricultural department featured the ranch in a publication about innovative farming practices. The local chamber of commerce named me Young Entrepreneur of the Year. But the recognition that meant most came from Jacqueline Harris, who told me one evening that Dorothy would be amazed by what I'd built. Quote 39, Jacqueline said, quote 40. As my fourth year on the ranch began, I found myself thinking more about the future than the past. I was 23 years old, financially secure, respected in my community, and deeply satisfied with the work I was doing. But I also felt ready for the next phase of my life, building a family of my own to continue Dorothy's legacy. I'd been dating Catherine Williams' daughter, Kimberly King, for 8 months. She was a teacher at the local elementary school, someone who understood rural life and shared my values about community and service. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on friendship and mutual respect rather than dramatic passion. When I proposed to her on Dorothy's porch one autumn evening with the ranch spread out below us in the golden light of sunset, it felt like the natural continuation of everything I'd built. She said yes with tears in her eyes, understanding that she wasn't just marrying me, but joining the extended family of people who'd made the ranch their home. Our wedding the following spring was held on the ranch itself, with neighbors and friends filling the pasture behind the farmhouse. Robert Richardson, now a close family friend, officiated the ceremony. Christopher Sanders served as my best man, and Jacqueline Harris walked me down the aisle in place of the family I'd never known. As Kimberly and I exchanged vows, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, from orphan child to successful rancher, from isolated teenager to pillar of the community, from someone who'd never experienced unconditional love to someone surrounded by chosen family. 5 years after inheriting Dorothy's ranch, I stood in the same courthouse where I'd won the legal battle against Jeffrey, but this time I was there for a celebration. The county was recognizing the ranch's contributions to agricultural education and sustainable farming practices. As I accepted the award, I looked out at an audience that included many of the people who'd helped me succeed. Jacqueline Harris, now in her 70s but still my closest advisor. Christopher Sanders, who'd become both employee and brother. Robert Richardson, whose legal expertise had made everything possible. But the most meaningful moment came when I saw Jeffrey Garcia in the back of the room, applauding along with everyone else. He'd found work with a conservation organization, using his knowledge of ranching to help other landowners implement sustainable practices. Our relationship would never be close, but we'd found a way to coexist peacefully, united by our shared connection to Dorothy's memory. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of giving young people opportunities to connect with agriculture, regardless of their backgrounds. I announced a new scholarship program, funded by the ranch's profits, that would help foster children pursue agricultural education. It felt like the perfect way to honor Dorothy's belief in second chances and the power of hard work. After the ceremony, Kimberly and I drove home to the ranch where she was now 6 months pregnant with our first child. We'd decided to name the baby Dorothy if it was a girl, continuing the family tradition in the most literal way possible. As we sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over the land that had become truly ours through years of careful stewardship, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The scared, angry teenager who'd received that first letter from Dorothy's lawyer was gone, replaced by a confident man who understood his place in the world. I'd learned that family isn't just about blood relationships, but about the people who choose to support and believe in each other. I discovered that home isn't just a place you inherit, but something you build through daily choices to care for the land and the community around you. Most importantly, I'd learned that Dorothy's gift wasn't really the ranch itself, but the opportunity to discover who I could become when someone believed in my potential. Every successful harvest, every healthy calf, every young person who found their path through our internship program was proof that her faith in me had been justified. As night fell over the ranch, I thought about the future I was building for my own children. They would grow up with advantages I'd never had: financial security, family stability, a clear sense of where they came from and where they belonged. But I also hoped they'd inherit the values that had made Dorothy's gifts so meaningful: the importance of hard work, the responsibility that comes with ownership, and the understanding that true success is measured not just by what you achieve, but by what you give back. The ranch now employed 8 people full-time and provided seasonal work for dozens more. We'd expanded to include agritourism, offering farm stays for families who wanted to experience rural life. We'd partnered with several universities on research projects related to sustainable agriculture. Most importantly, we'd created a model for how agricultural operations could serve their communities while remaining profitable. 10 years have passed since I first set foot on Dorothy Rodriguez's ranch as a 19-year-old with more questions than answers. As I write this, I'm 29 years old, married to an amazing woman who shares my vision for what this place can become, and father to two beautiful children who will grow up knowing they belong somewhere special. Our daughter Dorothy, now 4 years old, already shows signs of inheriting her great-grandmother's determination and love for the land. She follows me around during morning chores, asking endless questions about the cattle, and insisting on helping with tasks far beyond her abilities. Our son Michael, just 2, has his mother's gentle nature, but also shows flashes of the Rodriguez stubbornness that has served our family well. Christopher Sanders married one of our former interns, a young woman named Deborah Smith who'd aged out of foster care and found her calling in agricultural science. They live in the house we built for them on the South Pasture, and their own children play with mine, creating the kind of extended family Dorothy always dreamed of for this place. The ranch now encompasses 1,200 acres, expanded through careful purchases of adjoining properties. We run 500 head of cattle, maintain organic certification for our vegetable operation, and host agricultural education programs that serve thousands of students each year. The scholarship program has helped 37 young people pursue agricultural careers, with several returning to work on the ranch after completing their education. But success isn't measured only in numbers. It's measured in the letters I receive from former interns who've started their own farms, in the children who visit for field trips and discover a love for rural life, in the sustainable practices that are slowly spreading throughout our region because people see them working here. Most importantly, it's measured in the sense of belonging that fills every corner of this place. The ranch has become what Dorothy always intended it to be. Not just a business, but a home for people who need one, a school for those eager to learn, and a bridge between the agricultural past and a sustainable future. Sometimes, usually in the quiet moments before dawn when I'm walking out to check on the cattle, I think about the scared teenager who received that first letter about his inheritance. I wish I could tell him not to worry, that everything would work out better than he could possibly imagine. That the family he'd been searching for his entire life was waiting for him, not in blood relatives who shared his DNA, but in the community he'd built through hard work and genuine care for others. I wish I could tell him that home isn't something you find, it's something you create through daily choices to show up, work hard, and care for the people and places that matter. That belonging isn't about where you come from, but about what you choose to build and protect and pass on to future generations. The legal battle that brought me here feels like ancient history now, but I'm grateful for every difficult moment that taught me the ranch's true value. Jeffrey Garcia and I exchange Christmas cards now, and he visits occasionally to see what we have accomplished. He's found his own path to redemption through conservation work, and while we'll never be close, we've made peace with our shared history. Dorothy's portrait hangs in the living room, surrounded by pictures of the family she never got to meet but somehow brought together. Sometimes I catch myself talking to her photograph, updating her on ranch progress or asking for guidance on difficult decisions. I like to think she approves of what we've built here, that she's proud of the scared orphan who became the man she always believed he could be. As I look toward the future, I see endless possibilities. My children will grow up with choices I never had, but also with the responsibility to continue what Dorothy started and I've tried to honor. They'll learn that ownership means stewardship, that success means service, and that family is something you build rather than something you are simply born into. This ranch has taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, that hard work can overcome almost any disadvantage, and that the most important inheritance isn't money or land, but the belief that you're capable of something greater than your circumstances might suggest. So to anyone out there who feels lost or forgotten, who believes they don't deserve good things because of where they come from or what they've been through, I want you to know that your story isn't over. Somewhere, someone believes in your potential, even if you can't see it yourself. Somewhere, there's a place where you belong, work that will fulfill you, and people who will become family if you are brave enough to let them. If you're watching this from your hometown, drop a comment and let me know where that is. Share this story if it resonated with you, because you never know who might need to hear that second chances are real and that family is something you can build rather than something you have to be born into. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who found their way home against all odds, because there are so many more out there waiting to be told. Dorothy Rodriguez saw something in a grandson she'd never met, something worth fighting for across years of separation and legal battles. She was right to believe in me, just as someone, somewhere, is right to believe in you. The question isn't whether you deserve a second chance. The question is what you'll do when that chance finally comes. Home is waiting. You just have to be brave enough to build it.